The Senate inquiry into reproductive healthcare has handed down its report, but before we can even talk about the substance of this report, we need to dive into the unprecedented suppression of submissions that has taken place in this inquiry. So I've been an academic for over 10 years and I've never seen anything like this before in Australia. And I'm filming this video today because it's really important that we call out this anti-democratic behaviour by Larissa Waters and the Greens who are leading this inquiry. So this inquiry was set up after Roe v. Wade was overturned in the US last year, and it's a particular passion of Senator Larissa Waters from the Greens who initiated this inquiry, and her goal is free, accessible abortion. And this is what she said when she introduced the inquiry last year.
Access to abortion in Australia remains a postcode lottery. Sure, it's legal in most places now, but it's still not accessible and it's really expensive. We think the federal government should do more to make abortion accessible, and that's why I've initiated a Senate inquiry to look at just this.
Senate inquiries are often politically motivated, and it's completely fine for a senator to have a particular passion or a group of senators to have a passion and to create a Senate inquiry to look into that issue. If we look at the Senate inquiry website, committee processes are meant to be fair and transparent, and this is what the website says committee inquiries are about. The role of a Senate committee is to investigate and to draw attention to what they find. They throw light in dark corners and give advice. They also provide an opportunity for organisations and individuals to make representations to Parliament and to have their views placed on the public record. In fact, in announcing the inquiry, Larissa Waters took to social media and actually encouraged ordinary Australians to engage in the inquiry and to make submissions and to share their experiences with the inquiry. This is what she said.
We'd like you to share your experiences with us, whether that's your lived experience, whether that's your experience as a medical practitioner. We want to know what the barriers are and what you think should be done to tear them down. You've got until the 15th of December to give us your comments, and it can be as simple as an email, as informal as a few remarks, or as detailed as you'd like it to be.
Now, a couple of months down the track, what we can see that Larissa Waters actually meant was, if you agree with me on abortion, then write your submission and share your experiences because we want to hear from you. But if you don't agree with me and you think abortion is bad for women, then don't bother sharing your experiences or writing them down because we'll just disappear your submission and erase your voice. These are big claims to make, so I'm going to step you through the evidence in this video. The final report from the inquiry said that 352 submissions were made. Now, this is absolutely not true. There were over 2,000 submissions made by individual Australians and organisations to this inquiry. But what has happened is that those who were leading the inquiry saw fit to bury, exclude and disappear the submissions of individuals and organisations who took a different ideological position on abortion to Larissa Waters and the Greens. Submissions closed on December 15, and 6 weeks later submissions began to appear on the inquiry website. What became very obvious within the first few weeks is that the committee was front-loading all the submissions that either took a pro-choice by default position or they were aggressively pro-abortion. So submissions by Children by Choice, Marie Stopes International, the Abortion Project, academics that were pro-abortion like Carolyn Costa or Danielle Mazza. These were the submissions that were being front-loaded on the website, and there weren't, in the first 180, any submissions by pro-life individuals or organisations in any great number. And it was very clear to me that something suspicious was going on because I knew that 1,500 Australians had written submissions that were pro-life to this inquiry, but they weren't on the website and neither was mine. So I wrote to the inquiry, as some of you know, and asked about my submission, and mysteriously 6 days later my submission was published on the website alongside 8 other pro-life organisations. And at that time, I then thought, okay, they've seen the light, they're going to publish all the submissions now because we've brought it to their attention that they shouldn't be doing this. But that's not what happened. They dragged their feet and drip-fed submissions day by day, but we could see that the vast majority of pro-life submissions were not being uploaded. Even big organisations like Women's Forum Australia did not have their submission uploaded until the very 11th hour when the CEO of Women's Forum, Rachel Wong, made a very public calling out of the Senate inquiry to demand that their submission be published. But most Australians who wrote to this inquiry didn't have the organisational muscle of Women's Forum, and they had submitted their own experiences like Larissa Waters had asked them to do, but no one heard their voice demanding that their submission be published. And to this day, those submissions have been buried. So what happened 2 weeks ago is the Senate committee had a little announcement on its website saying that a whole lot of groups had submitted to the inquiry and that submissions had been made via the websites of these groups and that they were going to be bundled together. This is what the announcement said. The committee has received a large volume of material associated with 2 coordinated campaigns, including from a third-party coordinated campaign and the Australian Christian Lobby, as well as 3 form letters from Fair Agenda, Surrogacy Australia and Cherish Life. Correspondents associated with the campaigns and form letters either note that they do not support abortion services or that they do support abortion services. In light of the similarities of the views expressed in the campaigns and the form letters, the committee has agreed to publish a sample of each of the campaigns and form letters along with the key topics raised by individuals and the number of emails received in respect of each campaign. So anybody reading that seemingly innocuous announcement would think, fair enough, the committee's received a lot of submissions via these campaign websites, and so therefore it's okay to publish a sample. But a couple of days ago on the website, reading the fine print, we see that the samples have been published, and what we observe is that the numbers are vastly different, because what Larissa Waters and those leading this inquiry are trying to create is some kind of false equivalency between the pro-choice side and pro-surrogacy side and those that are pro-life or anti-abortion. But when we read the fine print on the website, what you notice is the numbers are actually vastly different to this. What you actually notice is that there were overwhelmingly far more pro-life submissions than there were to this inquiry from any other perspectives. So if we drill down, we can see that 320 individual Australians took the time to write submissions and submitted it via the ACL website. Another 30 did this via Cherish Life, and 1,270 Australians submitted via a third-party campaign website, which I think was the Canberra Declaration. But then on the other side, what we see is there was just 20 submissions from people writing from Surrogacy Australia's website and 130 who signed a letter submitted via the Fair Agenda website. And so, there's really no equivalency here between these two sides. We see that there was 1,620 individual Australians who had their submissions buried, who wrote from a pro-life perspective, arguing for something more for Australian women than abortion. And there was just 150 on the other side. When they chose to make the strategic decision to just publish a sample of these submissions and essentially count them as one, what they were doing was the pro-lifers, who were outnumbering the other side of 10 to 1, it made it look like they were equal, and they just weren't. The overwhelming majority of people who wrote to this inquiry were pro-life and wanted to have their views heard. But that's actually not the extent of it. There is a whole other group of submissions, if you read the fine print in the report, that have been erased from the record altogether. So at least we know there were 1,620 that submitted via these campaign websites, and their views have been counted as just one view, despite the fact that they were individually crafted submissions. What we see is there's a whole other group that have just been disappeared. And it's like we're in North Korea or something, or Stalinist Russia, not in, a Australian democracy. I just don't even understand how Larissa Waters thinks she can get away with this. I mean, the report makes it clear that there was a whole lot of other submissions that were excluded on the grounds that they were anti-abortion. So let me read to you what it says in the report. During the inquiry, the committee received a substantial amount of material that objected to the terminology used in the terms of reference and or commented on the ethics of pregnancy terminations and whether they should or should not be allowed in Australia. These submissions were excluded by the inquiry because they were outside the so-called terms of reference. Now, the committee doesn't say how many submissions were made, and I think that is fundamentally untransparent for them not to do so, because we can only think that this number must be quite significant, because even they say a substantial amount. So we can think that this is in the hundreds or thousands of Australians who've written to the inquiry, made submissions, and then they've just been disappeared from the record. And then the reason that they've given is that they were outside the terms of reference because they were anti-abortion. But this just doesn't make sense or add up, because the inquiry has published other anti-abortion submissions, and presumably given them the green light because they were within the terms of reference. So for example, my submission was entirely anti-abortion. And just a quick glance at the inquiry website shows that other submissions that were anti-abortion have been given the tick of approval and published on the website and not deemed outside of the terms of reference. So for example, submissions 185 to 193 were anti-abortion but deemed to be published. We also see that 221 to 240 were anti-abortion and they were published as well. So I think what's really going on here is not that this substantial amount of submissions were anti-abortion and therefore outside of the terms of reference. I think what's really going on here is that there was an overwhelming number, a substantial amount, if we want to quote Larissa Waters' words, a substantial amount of submissions that were anti-abortion, and they weren't outside the terms of reference. I mean, that much is clear because they published other anti-abortion submissions, but they didn't want to have them on the record and publish them because then it would have been patently clear to everyone that the overwhelming, vast majority of Australians who engaged with this inquiry wanted something more for Australian women than abortion. And here's the thing, Larissa Waters and the Greens, they like to act like they're in the majority position on abortion, when in reality they take an extremely radical perspective on abortion. They support free abortion paid by the taxpayer for any reason up until birth. And that is not a majority position in Australia. The Ipsos poll that came out recently showed that only 39% of Australians support abortion up to 20 weeks. So imagine how much less this support would be for free taxpayer-funded abortion up to birth, which is the radical position of the Greens. But Larissa Waters doesn't want you to know that Australians disagree with her. So instead of just being transparent and publishing this substantial amount of anti-abortion submissions, she just erased them from the public record and disappeared them. And, you know, I don't think that this is something she should be getting away with. And since the report has been published, I've actually been inundated by Australian women emailing me and contacting me saying, my submission was not there and I'm outraged that it has not been included by the committee. Because let's look at what Larissa Waters said.
We'd like you to share your experiences with us.
So she's saying that she wants Australian women to share their experiences. But look at this, I received an email from an Australian woman who said that she shared her experience of taking abortion pills to the inquiry, and she wrote a submission about the fact that when she took these pills, she was rushed to emergency. It was deeply traumatic. She had to undergo an emergency dilation and evacuation abortion because there was retained products of conception. And in her submission, she just asked the committee that there be more information given to women before they take abortion pills so that they can know that there are these side effects that can happen and for them to really be communicated about this. But her submission was disappeared by Larissa Waters and her colleagues who have the power to do so because it didn't suit their ideological agenda. Another woman shared her experience with the committee. She emailed me about the fact that in her submission she'd written about her abortion over 10 years ago and how since that abortion she's had lifelong mental health effects, and you know she struggled with depression and suicidal ideation since that time. And in her submission she wanted the committee to know that women should be given proper support after an abortion to get grief counselling, and that before an abortion there should really be proper processes to screen them for mental health issues. Her submission was not included. It was disappeared from the record, and she spent hours writing that submission. Another former law student of mine wrote to me saying, I wrote a very long submission, really deeply researched, using her legal skills that I'd hopefully taught her at university, and she wrote this submission about reproductive health care encompassing way more than abortion and using research from all around the world. Her submission disappeared from the website, not published, because it didn't support the ideological view of the senators who were leading this inquiry. I mean, I could go on and on with the stories of Australian women who are outraged and who have contacted me because their submissions have not been included because Larissa Waters and those who are leading this inquiry didn't agree with them. So this is obviously not the way a Senate committee inquiry should be conducted, and it actually taints the entire work of the inquiry and the final report. And then to make matters worse, they conducted 5 days of oral hearings, and they went around the country interviewing organisations and individuals but they only interviewed those that agree with them. They didn't interview a single pro-life individual or organisation. So this was a fundamentally flawed process. It's resulted in a fundamentally flawed and biased report, and the Labor government should think very, very carefully before going near any of the recommendations around abortion in this report. What the Labor government needs to know is that the overwhelming majority of Australians who engaged with this inquiry told the inquiry that they didn't want free, accessible abortion. They didn't want women being shoehorned and funneled into abortion, but they wanted genuine solutions for Australian women who are in crisis and unplanned pregnancies. I mean, the research shows that the majority of women who choose abortion do so because of mental health issues or because of deeply difficult socioeconomic circumstances. So for a Labor government to now go down the road advocated by this very radical extreme inquiry would be very dangerous and out of step with the views of the Australians that engaged with this inquiry in good faith and then had themselves disappeared from the record. And I acknowledge that the issue of abortion is deeply controversial. But we are not a democracy if we conduct a Senate inquiry and we erase the views of the people that disagree with us. We're not a democracy if the people with power and control use that power in an unfair, unaccountable way. And I would ask Larissa Waters to think about what would it be like if the alternative had occurred, if you had a bunch of pro-life senators who led this inquiry and they just erased and eliminated the views of pro-choice Australians who engaged with the inquiry. There would be a media outcry and we would be rightly outraged by that corrupt behaviour. So in this situation, when it's happened in the reverse, it's not okay either, and we need to call it out because we don't want to see this happen again. This is not a situation where thousands of Australians signed the same letter and submitted to the inquiry and were then counted as one submission. This is a situation where thousands of Australians took the time to share their stories, to research this issue and to write their own individual submission, and they had their voices excluded because they disagreed with the ideological position on abortion by Larissa Waters and the Greens who were leading this inquiry. This is not the Australia that we want to see. This is not the Australia that I want my children to grow up in. And so if you agree with me, please comment below, share this video and spread the word about this fundamentally anti-democratic and unfair process so that we can have a proper conversation on the issue of abortion and women's health in Australia. Thank you.